That's one hypothesis. It's not to say that's the only explanation. I mean, some cultural features are just, in my view, more or less straightforward consequences of historical racism. For example, the crime problem in the black community. Eugenics was a mainstream ideology across the political spectrum in the beginning of the 20th century.
What is eugenics?
Eugenics being the idea that we need to prevent the, quote, genetically inferior members of society from reproducing and promote reproduction among the genetically superior member of society in order to improve the species. So it was taken as mainstream among progressives on the left and conservatives on the right in the early 20th century that black people were inferior and should be encouraged to not reproduce for the betterment of humanity. And this is a period when police forces are also ramping up and taking their modern form. So what happened is that, or at least one thing that happened is that white communities got the benefit of policing where black communities didn't. The attitude was, if there's violence in the black community, we'll basically let them kill each other as a form of population control. Whereas if there's violence in, say, the Irish community, we're going to crack down on it and make those communities safe. So what happens is that in the absence of a police force, the natural state of any human group, regardless of race, is for young men to compete for status through violence. And the black community did not get the benefit of policing in the same way. So a culture of honor, a culture where every young man is incentivized to take revenge on the person who killed his friend or brother.
Which is what you see in a lot of gangs right now.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes. So that the way I view it is that if an alien came from Mars and just studied the past 10,000 years of human history, they would find the rate of homicide and violence in Chicago and in St. Louis and South Central LA. They would find that to be more typical. And they would find that the really low rates of violence in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or really nice suburbs, they would find that to be the phenomenon to be explained. And the way it's explained is that is good and effective policing, which the black community has historically lacked, largely for reasons of racism, and in some ways still lacks, because there is in many high crime communities, there's an over policing of drug offenses and an under policing of violent offenses, where a murder of a black person is less likely to be solved than a murder of a white person by a significant degree. So what that does is now, my cousin was killed and I can't count on the police to solve it. So who am I if I don't retaliate? That's the culture that has been allowed to thrive in high crime communities of color. That was so I mean, yeah, ultimately every feature of culture that I want to talk about has a historical explanation for how it got there. And it's a historical explanation that doesn't imply that anyone is to blame, right? I mean, the problem here is that people feel you're blaming victims by invoking cultural explanations. This is not what I'm doing. Blame is totally irrelevant to this conversation. Like no one is to blame for the culture that they accidentally were born into. No one chooses where they're born. No one chooses the values that are inculcated on mother's knee. None of choice and blame are totally irrelevant to this picture. So
you talk about the parable of the pedestrian. Is that what it was?
Yeah. The parable of the pedestrian is a parable by the legal scholar Amy Wax, and it goes like this: imagine that there's a pedestrian that is hit by a car and injured. Their spine is injured, and they go to the ER. The doctors do what they can, and when they wake up, they're told The only way for you to fix this, there's no surgery, we just don't have the surgery. The only way for you to fix this is to go to physical therapy for 2 years every day. And in that context, that pedestrian might feel, well, this is ridiculous. Why is it on me to fix this, right? It should be on the driver. I should be getting damages. The driver should be making me whole. He's the one that hit me, which is true. But just make the driver Bill Gates, so that if there were a surgery that cost $1 billion, he could cover it. There just is no surgery. There's just nothing that exists. The only cure is for the pedestrian to work, as unfair as that is, right? It's not victim blaming in that context to say, you're the one that has to do this, even though you're not the one that caused the problem. So this analogy is to any feature of Black culture that at this point is counterproductive and leading to bad outcomes that wasn't caused by Black people. It may have been caused by slavery, caused by Jim Crow. But it's not just the person who causes something is not often able to fix it, or not always able to fix it. And this is loops back to reparations before. Like, how is reparations going to fix the taboo on academic achievement? No, I mean that's a problem that has to have an internal, bottom-up solution, even if it's a problem that was created by white people in the past.
Right. Well, for this one in particular, I've heard